Hello, everyone. I'm going to give a minute for everyone to get virtually situated as we get started here. That was a lot of people all joining at once, but welcome. Give us just 1 minute while everyone else gets in here. All right. All right, I guess I'll get going. Hopefully that was enough for everyone to get in. If anyone's having trouble hearing me, throw up a comment in the group chat or something like that, and I'll slow up or repeat myself, whatever you need. But to get started, I just wanted to say how much of an honor it is to get this lecture series kicked off. We are the first in the series of executive education courses provided by Pratt Institute and the Brooklyn AIA. And the amount of interest this series has generated is really amazing. I guess you guys can probably see how many participants there are on this call already. We opened this up with an initial capacity of 100 people, and that filled up in less than a day. We increased it to 200, and that capacity got passed up in a day, and we ultimately brought it up to 280 and filled up all of those spots. So thank you for your interest. It makes us feel great about sharing our knowledge here. And we've had similar success on the other lectures that that are part of this series. I want you to keep an eye out for those if you're also interested in those. So the next one is on May 7th, and that's going to be the course on historic preservation in New York City beyond the pandemic. After that, on May 14th, we have a course called Daylighting and Simulation Analysis, and that one is already at capacity, and we cannot expand the capacity for that one. So if you are interested in that, you'll have to reach back out to us and see if it can get offered again. And then we end this initial series on May 20th with a lecture on placemaking, engaging community in a time of physical distancing. But don't be disheartened. We are working on the next series to come after that, so stay tuned, and hopefully we'll have more for you, and we like this one that kicks us all off here. I just want to take a quick comment here for how these series, this executive education series got going. Like most things these days, it's directly linked up in some way with COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm on the steering committee. I'm Jesse Krismer. I'll introduce everyone in just a minute. I'm on the steering committee at Pratt Institute to develop these executive education courses. And we've been making, the kind of steady progress that you typically make when you don't have a really firm deadline. And then, of course, the pandemic came and shut down the physical world, and we started to back off from our planning initially. But then we were having a meeting with Dean Harris of the Pratt School of Architecture, and we were discussing the devastating economic effects that were hitting the architecture industry. And she immediately noticed that this series, if given online, could be a huge service and benefit to our industry. And she vowed that Pratt would take on all the expenses as a way to help our industry, and implored us to get this series out right away. And so here we are. And for that vision and that drive, I really want to extend my sincere gratitude to Dean Harris and the Pratt Institute School of Architecture. I think this series is really going to highlight one of the mission statements of the school, which is ethical judgment that stresses the importance of community and sustainability. Beyond that, I also want to send a huge thank you to the Brooklyn AIA, and in particular Marshall Suster, who immediately saw the potential for this partnership and helped accommodate this series. And no doubt, through this initiative, Brooklyn AIA will continue representing the professional interests of architects, which it's been doing for over 100 years. And finally, I wanted to thank the rest of the Executive Education Committee, especially our leader, Vicki Werner, who's been behind the scenes getting all of this ready. So much thank you to Vicki. So before we get started, I wanted to go through protocol for this session. Denise, if you could skip to the next slide, please. This is kind of what we're going to be doing to get started here. We are going to only be having you use the chat feature if you're in the audience. So you've all been muted, but you can chat, and in fact, you should be chatting right now. If you need AIA credit for this, please type your name into the chat here, and we will be recording the chat and giving credit to everyone who types in their name. If you find that you're having trouble with refresh speed or hearing us well, or anything's choppy, feel free to turn off your camera. Otherwise, like I said, use the chat for questions. We will be opening up for Q&A at the end. So, you know, at that point, we'll be reading right off the board. If you have a question during the middle, feel free to type it in there, and I'll try to do my best to grab hold of it. But really, at the end there is when I'll be paying most attention to the chat. And then also at the end, we're going to be posting a survey for you to answer that will really just help us, provide more of these great lectures and provide them better and more efficiently. So please take the time to fill that out. And I think that's all of the things that we need to get on there. So before I introduce the rest of the panelists, let me very briefly introduce myself. My name is Jesse Krismer, and I'm a structural engineer with McLaren Engineering. I'm also the Professional Development Chair with ACE Mentoring of Greater New York, and I'm a visiting assistant professor with the Pratt Undergrad School of Architecture. And I think you're going to probably find that being a professor at Pratt Institute is the common theme here. So look forward to introducing the rest. Next, I'm going to introduce Nicole Ferreira. She's a Senior Vice President of Multifamily Housing at the New York State Homes and Community Renewal. She's responsible for the strategic leadership of all multifamily finance programs and debt issuance that supports New York's $20 billion commitment to affordable housing and curtailing homelessness. The program she runs creates and preserves 100,000 affordable units over 5 years, including 6,000 supportive housing units. Previously, Nicole served as Executive Vice President for Real Estate at NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority, where she led the development of new construction and preservation of public housing. In 2017, Nicole won the Citizens Housing and Planning Council Ebo Bolton Community Planner Award. And on top of all of that, Nicole is an adjunct professor at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs, professor at the Pratt Graduate School of Real Estate, and at NYU's Schack Institute of Real Estate. Next, let me introduce Gerard Delane. He has experience in real estate, private equity, consulting, not-for-profit advising, and project management. Gerard spent his early career as an architect in Central Florida. His architectural experience was primarily focused on multifamily buildings, including affordable housing, market rate housing, condominiums, senior housing, and hospitality. Gerard spent the last 10 years of his career in the real estate development realm. His efforts have included asset management, financing, acquisitions, construction and development, due diligence, and he is currently the Director of Development for Carthage Real Estate Advisors, where he provides and creates real estate that improves communities and generates needed economic development activity. Gerard is also an adjunct professor at NYU and a visiting assistant professor at Pratt's Construction and Facilities Management program. Next up, let me introduce Chris Cirillo, the Executive Director and President of Ascend Neighborhood Development Corporation. Based in East Harlem, Ascend has preserved and developed over 800 affordable rental apartments in northern Manhattan, with an additional 300 affordable rental apartments in the pipeline. Among its new projects are a 190-unit senior housing project and a shared housing project for LGBTQ young people. Under Chris's guidance, Ascend has expanded their work to include neighborhood planning, historic preservation, and asset management. Chris has helped to establish the Northern Manhattan Collaborative, an alliance of local nonprofit housing providers, and Landmark East Harlem, an alliance of local historic preservation advocates. Before joining Ascend, he was the Vice President for Development at the Richmond Group Development Corporation. And Chris also held several positions at the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, HPD, including Director of Large-Scale Development and Assistant Commissioner for Neighborhood Planning. He now serves as a visiting assistant professor in the Historic Preservation and Real Estate Practice programs at Pratt, his alma mater. And finally, let me introduce Desiree Andropont, who has over 20 years of public and private sector experience working in various roles in affordable housing, finance, policy, real estate development, and construction. Desiree has held positions at the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development and the New York City Housing Development Corporation. From 2011 to 2014, she was the Director of Real Estate Planning and Development at the Housing Authority of New Orleans, where she was responsible for post-Katrina redevelopment efforts. Desiree is currently a senior project manager for the Community Builders and is a visiting assistant professor in the real estate practice program at Pratt. And since I have, oh wait, sorry, I'm not quite gonna give it over to Desiree yet, but Desiree, if you could flip one more slide for me. The learning objectives that we have for everyone on the call today are listed up on your screen. I'm not gonna read them word for word here, but we want you to know about the affordable housing policies, specifically in New York and New York City, and how the COVID-19 pandemic is influencing the state of that practice, both right now and in the future, and just develop your understanding of housing and public health. And since I just introduced Desiree last, I'm going to pass it on to Desiree to give a brief explanation of the basis of affordable housing.
Thank you, Jesse, so much. And thanks everyone for joining us. The group of us wanted to kind of establish a common language or a basic understanding of affordable housing and how it works. I think everybody has heard of affordable housing, but really wanted to kind of introduce some vocabulary and some context for our discussion. So let's start with affordable housing and what does it mean? What is affordable? And who is the target recipient for affordable housing? When housing is affordable, it's affordable to a family or an individual if they contribute no more than 30% of their pre-tax income toward housing costs. And that is kind of the basic parameter for understanding whether housing is affordable or not to an individual or family. If a family pays more than 30% of their income for housing, it's considered to be a cost burden. Housing costs include, for renters, of course, rent and utilities. Utility is incorporated into that calculation of whether or not something exceeds that 30% of income. And for homeowners, it would include a mortgage payment, principal and interest, real estate taxes, and insurance, and utilities there as well. Housing costs, high housing costs can have a very significant negative impact on a household's ability to provide other basic essentials, specifically low and very low income households. That includes food, clothing, healthcare, childcare, transportation, and that can cause what's called housing instability. And let's look at kind of what the numbers are. In the United States, there are approximately 120 million households in the US. About a third of those are renters, and nearly half of the renters are rent burdened, paying more than 30% of their income toward housing. And in the US, there are 12 million renter and homeowner households that are severely rent burdened. Severely rent burdened means they're paying more than 50% of their annual income toward housing. So that it is something that's pervasive throughout the United States. How is it measured? Affordable housing is usually, the usual language around affordable housing is area median income. And area median income is established by HUD for metropolitan statistical areas around the United States. It differs by locale. Metropolitan statistical areas are kind of incorporate cities and counties. And that number, that area median income, is updated annually. So every year there's an updated AMI, annual median income, for the MSAs. For example, and just to give you an example of an MSA, the New York City metropolitan statistical area includes not just the 5 boroughs, but it also includes Putnam County and Westchester County. Just to give you an idea of what our MSA is, where we're living. When we talk about affordability AMI, it's expressed as a percentage of area median income. So the AMI that is stated, usually the number that comes out that people refer to, is 100% of AMI for a family of 4. And we'll look at what that is for New York City in a moment. But extremely low income is up to 30% of AMI. Very low income is up to 50. And low income can be 50 to 80, and then there are moderate and middle income tiers that can be above area median income. But in places like New York City, moderate and middle income families and individuals do have a need for affordable housing, and that's something that's not only unique to New York City, but it is something that isn't typical in other places. So let's talk about what are the incentives around affordable housing? Federal, state, and local governments provide a lot of types of incentives to address housing need. Some are targeted directly to providing capital to a project or a development. Some are targeted at increasing the project's NOI, and those can include rent subsidies or real estate tax incentives. And some incentives can be targeted at land, specifically land or land use. And so let's talk about some of the capital financing incentives. There are income tax credit programs rather. These programs provide equity to affordable housing developments, and the federal low income housing tax credit is one of the most popular and successful tools available to increase the supply of affordable housing. It's used across the country as a federal incentive. And there are also state tax credit programs that are available as well in some states, and New York State has a state tax credit program. There are also subsidy loans that are available. New York City and New York State are very good at developing subsidy loan programs that can target different levels of affordability and different program areas. So those subsidy loans can provide below market interest rates. Some are interest only or no payments with a balloon payment deferred. Sometimes that loan can be extinguishing or evaporating, but there are lots of ways to structure subsidy loans that typically come from state and local capital dollars. That's from tax revenues that come from state and local governments. And another tool is tax and bond financing. It's also a federal type incentive, but that can also be used to provide low cost loans to affordable housing projects. Rent subsidies can include rental assistance subsidies that come in the form of a voucher through a tenant potentially, and can allow a tenant to access a unit that may be higher than what they would otherwise be able to afford. And rental assistance subsidies can also be attached to a project through a contract, and those rental subsidies go directly, they benefit the renters, but those subsidies go directly to the property owner for those units. Another incentive that is in addition to rental assistance that is targeted to increasing NOI in a project is real estate tax incentives. So if a local government provides a real estate tax incentive, an abatement, or an exemption, they're effectively reducing the cost to the operations of the project. And New York City has several abatement and exemption programs that are targeted to different types of borrowers, different types of developments, rehab, new construction, and some of them you may have heard of are 420C, J51, Article 11. Those are some very common ones that are related to affordable housing. Land or land use incentives include zoning incentives. Mandatory inclusionary housing was something that was recently put in place in the past few years, but there have been other inclusionary programs that are related to some of the citywide rezoning. So inclusionary housing is a tool, a zoning incentive, sometimes offering a zoning bonus for including affordable housing. AIRS is a program that's used in New York City for senior housing. The FRESH program is related to providing grocery stores in food deserts, but it does give zoning floor area reallocation for FRESH program. And of course, zoning changes and rezonings are also another way to use zoning incentives as a tool. And then public land, the New York City has had many programs targeted to putting underutilized land back into service. In the past decades, they have had a significant amount of vacant land that was available. It's largely been put back into service. Now, the city agencies and state agencies are looking towards underutilized land, a lot of times parking lots and things like that, that would be better used for housing. NYCHA land, of course, is another one of those opportunities, very controversial, but there is a lot of available floor area and space on NYCHA property for building additional affordable housing. So how do we tie that back to AMI? Well, eligibility for incentives is often determined by using AMI. It's a way of trying to target income tiers, and the incentives are often crafted around targeting income tiers through AMI. So AMI is a really important way of kind of identifying levels of affordability. So, and the AMI is used in a couple of ways in affordable housing. Rents are calculated, so based on area median income. So the rent calculations for an affordable rent will use AMI in that calculation. There's adjusted for unit size and things like that. But rents are calculated with AMI. And then income for eligible renters is also calculated for AMI. And those are adjusted for family size, and that allows a family to qualify for a rent at a particular income tier. So incomes, qualifying renters, and then also qualifying rents are calculated using AMI. Some of the incentives, that very popular low-income housing tax credit incentives, the average rent for a building that's using LIHTC low-income housing tax credits, the average rent cannot exceed 60% of area median income, and that's considered low income. There's recently been an adjustment to that program that allows for income averaging, and so income, rents and income can go up to 80 AMI, but the average of affordability within a building cannot exceed 60% of area median income. So that offers an ability to kind of target multiple income tiers. So instead of trying to max out all of your rents at 60 AMI, it gives you an opportunity to get some higher income units and lower income units, but still have a project that qualifies for the tax credit. There are a lot of state and local incentives. State and local governments provide additional incentives targeted to achieve different affordable housing goals. Like I said, reaching specific affordability levels, maybe targeting preservation or rehab, new construction or mixed use, home ownership. There are a lot of ways that state and local governments kind of use AMI and their incentive programs to target not just affordability levels, but different types of affordable housing development. So let's look at New York City, rents and income in New York City. In our city, in the New York City metropolitan statistical area for 2020, the area median income for a family of 4 is $113,700. And for that family of 4, an affordable 2-bedroom rent would be $2,451. Anything above that would be beyond that 30% of income. And for example, just for context, starting salaries in New York City, if there was a four-person family, the mother is a police officer, father is a teacher, their combined income is about 100% of AMI. So for that family of 4, that teacher and police officer with 2 kids, they would want to find a 2-bedroom unit for $2,400 for it to be affordable. Now, when we contrast that to the New York City median monthly rent, according to Curbed in February, the Manhattan monthly rent, median monthly rent was $35.95. The Brooklyn monthly rent was $2,987, and the Queens was $2,933. That includes studios 1, 2s, and 3s. So right there, you can see that even a family at 100% of area median income will have a difficult time finding an affordable apartment in New York City. And I know that's not news to anyone here. So, and just wanted to draw that out a little more. We won't stay on this slide for too long, but when we were looking at these extremely low, very low income, moderate income, middle income tiers, this is what that would look like in New York City. So for a family of 4, a minimum wage earner family of 4 might make $34,000 a year. That's considered extremely low income, and they would need to have a unit that was a 2-bedroom unit at $659 per month for that to be considered affordable for that family. So in order to achieve these kind of lower rents, it really does require a lot of assistance from federal, state, and local governments using all the incentives that we were kind of going through earlier. So let's talk about the New York City market. New York City has been in a housing emergency, and that means vacancy rates have been below 5% for decades. And in New York City, and this isn't the case everywhere, but affordable rents that would meet the AMI requirements to be eligible for federal, state, and local incentives that are available, they're almost always below market rent. So almost all affordable housing in New York City is below market. This is not the case in other parts of the country. I just wanted to point that out. It feels like something we all kind of know intuitively about New York City, but that isn't the rule across the board in other places. And in New York City, if a project utilizes some of these incentives that are available, they will have to lease up the units through a housing lottery. And for context, a project that might have 150 units will have tens of thousands of applicants for those units through the housing lottery. That's not unusual. That's typical. So there's a tremendous demand for these units. And when we talk about affordability over time, the concept of affordability in targeted populations, it can change over time and by location. So city and state governments increasingly are targeting more specific populations. And I know in New York City, there's been a big push, of course, to house folks who are homeless and have permanent housing for formerly homeless individuals and families. There's a lot of supportive housing that's being developed that targets specific populations. There's senior housing is a very big issue now. There are a huge number of seniors in public housing who are overhoused, and there's some attempt to try to help provide housing that's specifically for seniors so that we can free up other units, larger units for families. So in terms of supply, that's kind of illustrating the demand that's out there. In terms of supply, the current New York City housing 10-year housing plan is to build 300,000 units by 2026. And since 2014, over the past 5 to 6 years, we've built and preserved almost 150,000 units. And about 80% of those are low income or extremely low income units. So the large majority of affordable housing that's being built is targeting those very low income tiers that we looked at on the last slide. Another issue with supply, of course, is that the real estate cycle is very long. New construction of affordable housing can take 3 to 5 years if it's going really well. So sometimes it can take much longer than that. So there's a huge, often public approvals process. Sometimes there's a wait for subsidy availability. So it's the cycle is very long. Just in general, real estate cycle in general is very long. Affordable housing can sometimes have some other constraints that make it longer. And then more broadly, I just wanted to make this point that this need for affordable housing, which feels like it's becoming more urgent and more prevalent, is tied in many ways to stagnant wages and increasing housing costs. And that as wages kind of stagnate and stay flat, housing costs do not stop increasing. Utility costs increase, construction costs increase, operating costs increase. So those things aren't, they're not changing at the same rate, and that's a big part of the problem. And I don't think we can solve that here, but I just thought it was important to say. And then just wanted to kind of transition now to our discussion around COVID. Of course, there's significant job loss and job reduction for city residents. Low-wage earners have been really deeply affected by layoffs. There's a real impact on the low-income housing tax credit value in this market right now, and that has the effect of reducing the available equity to these affordable housing projects. It means they would need more subsidy in order to be feasible to develop. Targeting lower income tiers to reach these folks who have lost their jobs and who may be impacted over a very long term, that will require more subsidy in order to develop those units. Another huge issue is that the city and state are facing significantly reduced tax revenue, which impacts the budget and impacts their ability to borrow. So these are all things that people are discussing now and trying to figure out how to address. The New York City housing budget has cuts of about $1 billion over the next 2 years. That will affect some of the programs that are available. And then we all need to kind of start thinking about how do we address this. So preventing evictions, covering lost rent, increasing production of affordable housing, trying to find direct federal support for and rental assistance for housing and housing production, and then trying to help state and local governments to support their affordable housing efforts. So I want to share one thing. I'm working on a project now in the South Bronx. It's a 180,000 square foot project with 178 affordable units. All the units are 80 AMI and below. And it's a 10-story block and plank building with a fresh grocery store on the ground floor. And we have been in construction about 8 or 9 months now. We had a little slowdown about a month ago because the masonry sub was having trouble putting together a masonry crew. But our contractor, who's been amazing, has really put in place some measures to try to help increase safety for the workers on the site. And I wanted to share a couple of pictures. Here's some social distancing on the job site. You'll see this guy has a face mask on in the middle. And here's some more social distancing and face masks. So that's my part. I'm going to hand it back to Jesse. Hope that was helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Desiree. That was great. I think that, really highlights the importance of affordable housing, especially in New York State and New York City. And you got into right at the end there, I think a very important part for our discussion for this time, which is the effect of COVID and social distancing. So one thing that's, been pretty remarkable with, like we said, the importance of affordable housing is that almost every jurisdiction has listed affordable housing specifically as an essential service. So all construction on affordable housing is going through. Nicole, I think that, your role in government might best lead you to kind of help explain why that is, why it's so important we stay on top of this push for affordable housing.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for that, Desiree. That was very helpful, laying the table of all of these things. So I think, from the state perspective, Desiree touched on the New York City 300,000 units through 2026. In New York State, we have a 5-year housing plan that started in 2016. And that is to produce 100,000 units, but an additional 6,000 supportive housing units because the homeless issue is a huge issue in New York. And so we have an additional sort of commitment of funding towards homelessness. But, this is very sort of both programs are focused on state and city capital in order to get it done. So a lot of municipalities across the country right now are kind of scrambling to figure out how do you continue those programs when you have budget cuts at the state and local levels. And so the CARES Act released a bunch of funding, and I think it's, just the beginning, even though I think in late March, the third tranche of $2 trillion went out from the federal package, but there's a lot still to be done, advocacy around trying to get additional monies to renters and to building owners, and then to hit on the third part of the stool. I think it's a 3-legged stool here, is to open up the capital markets to enable us to provide more liquidity to build more affordable housing. Construction delays in these kinds of projects is a big deal because, we have to house these folks. And at the end of the day, I was reading an analysis earlier today that said, kind of cross-cut the unemployment insurance monies that were being let out, the maximum amount and the minimum amount of unemployment insurance, and looked at high-cost cities. And when you look at New York City, if a household is getting the maximum unemployment benefit, they're still, using about 34% of that check towards their rent in New York. So that they're still rent burdened, even in getting unemployment insurance. And if you're getting the minimum, you're using about 54% of that check towards rent. So that is a really big problem that COVID is sort of, creating. And we have to continue to sort of get, subsidy programs directed to low-income New Yorkers, and it's not just New York, it's every single state that's grappling with this issue. So I think that's the New York State response is, renters first, and also landlords and owners, because both of those things go together, so that focus is being talked about nationwide. Every single state is grappling with these issues right now.
Yeah, and I think, we've brought up some of the really big challenges of continuing to deliver what's going to be an increased demand, even more than we anticipated. We already had this huge demand for affordable housing. It's just going up, and the funds to accomplish it are getting less. Chris, I know you're involved in some great programs that are really thinking outside of the box on how to deliver affordable housing. Would you mind speaking to some of that? Because that might be the only way forward.
Sure, thanks. And thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. I run, as Jesse mentioned, a nonprofit organization that's based in northern Manhattan. We've been around for 32 years and have developed over 800 units of affordable rental housing across East and Central Harlem. In a good year, it's challenging to do this work, especially as a nonprofit. This year has added multiple new complexities for us. We have projects in construction that have been at least temporarily stalled because of the pandemic, that have required a lot of extra work from our contractor and from us and our architects to be able to get restarted as essential projects. And pretty much all of the projects in our pipeline, we're now having to reevaluate in terms of time frame due to changes in the public approval process that have had to be implemented because of the pandemic and social distancing. We're also, one of those projects is one that we've been working on that's for a new model of shared housing. So working with our architects at Think Architecture in Brooklyn, we submitted a proposal last year to the city's Department of Housing Preservation and Development as part of their Share NYC initiative, looking at new models of affordable housing and ways that we can, through design innovation, create more affordable housing and different typologies of housing that better serve the varying needs of different types of households and individuals. So our team was one of 3 that were selected from that process. And we've been working on developing the plans for a 36-unit shared housing project that will serve young adults. We're working in partnership with the Ali Forney Center, which is a social service organization that specifically serves LGBTQ youth. And so that project, like all affordable housing projects, has a process to go through for public approvals, financing approvals, permitting through the Department of Buildings. But on top of that, we're grappling now with thinking about this typology of shared housing. So the city has been looking at different models where some elements of housing that, in recent decades have largely been self-contained within people's apartments, kitchens, bathrooms, shared living spaces, like living rooms. Everybody has their own. And so through this Share NYC initiative, we've been working on a new model where some of those elements of the housing units are actually shared among multiple residents. And so, I still believe that it's very much something that we need to look at as a typology that we really need to have. but it's certainly, something that we're thinking about now in the wake of this pandemic and the need for social distancing and people to be sheltering in place in their homes. How do we look at a shared housing model where people can do that should a situation like the one that we're in now occur again? So there's a lot of challenges that we're grappling with and trying to think about design innovations, but also just the general challenges of working in this environment where the typical processes that we're pretty used to in terms of public approvals, financing, permitting, construction, have all been so profoundly impacted in ways that none of us have really experienced before. So it has created challenges all across the life cycle of the projects that we're working on, as I'm sure all of my co-panelists will agree with their projects.
Yeah, not to put you right back on the spot, but can you talk a little bit more about the public approvals process and how that is changed? And, I'm sure it's gone online now. How are you reaching out to the public?
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that is new for everybody, including the various city agencies that are having to grapple with the need for social distancing and not having large groups of people gathering together. So as Desiree mentioned in her initial presentation, many affordable housing projects have discretionary land use approvals that require the involvement of the Department of City Planning, approval through the city's Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, or ULURP, which is a multi-step process that involves review at the community board level, at the borough president's level, by the City Planning Commission, and then the City Council. And so, there was a pause for a while on ULURP actions, and I think the Department of City Planning is still working to kind of figure out what the new procedures are going to be. But for at least the foreseeable future, those processes are going to be virtual. And I know the Landmarks Preservation Commission that gets involved in some affordable housing projects that involve designated landmarks or buildings in historic districts had their first online public hearing last week. And so, I think all the agencies are grappling with the technical challenges of how to do public hearings where the public isn't all in one place, which has been the traditional model. In some ways, it opens up the process because whoever wants to join, if they have the technological capacity to, can do so from the comfort of their home. But it also does raise a lot of questions about whether people are able to participate and what a public hearing is like if people can't all be together to discuss the issues at hand, including whatever body is reviewing that. Community boards, which are the first step in that process, and where most affordable housing projects have to go regardless of whether they're going formally through ULURP or informally as a presentation to the board about a project within its boundaries, are also having to grapple with this. Community boards, as we all know, are often, don't have a lot of staff. And so they have also had to grapple with transitioning their work and their meetings to an online situation. So I think, since we're still so early on in this and none of us know exactly how long these requirements are going to stay in place, but it seems like for a significant period, I think we're still trying to see how this is going to impact the public approvals process. And certainly for us as a neighborhood-based nonprofit, we value very much public participation, public engagement, involvement in the design process and in thinking about what we're going to build, how we're going to build it, and making sure that it serves the communities that we serve. And so, excuse me, we're having to think about how do we do that? How do we do our work as a neighborhood-based nonprofit? And with our design teams, with our development partners, and our local community members and residents, in a situation where we can't all come together, where we can't all sit around a table or in a room and talk about the project that we're working on and get that feedback in person, which is such an important part of the process. So That's still pretty much to be determined how that's going to impact projects that are going forward, but definitely is making all of us have to be really creative about making sure that we are still getting the feedback and input and appropriate public hearings for the projects that we're working on.
Yeah, I think you talked a lot about, how your team has to all react to this, every part of that. And Gerard, I know you're heavily involved in PPP or public-private partnerships. Have you seen a big change in a lot of that, how those are structured and how you move forward throughout all of this to still deliver affordable housing?
Well, similar to what Chris had mentioned, so much of our business, relies on meetings and face-to-face negotiations historically. So a lot of things like meeting with DOB plan reviewers, having community board approvals, all these different factors that we never really did online. We're all having to now grapple with how to continue forward, having safe construction projects so that our projects can complete in a timely fashion, but as safe as possible for all involved. So I think we're all learning, new means and methods to do projects in this new environment.
Changing gears here just a little bit. I'm not sure which one will be the first to speak up on this, but I imagine all of you can a little bit. With the, not to downplay how disastrous the health effects of COVID have been, but also, the economic impact has been incredible. And that's going to have a huge impact on how AMI is calculated coming up. How is that going to affect kind of all of your strategies from developer to community relations to government? We're going to have this one, hopefully just one, huge outlier year of very low incomes, already. How do we take that into account?
I'd like to go first on that one. I think, historically when you sign a lease, they look at your bank statements, they look at your check stubs, they look at your history. We're now having this kind of, historic black swan moment where, jobs have stopped for reasons that are out of people's control, right? Bartenders, hostesses, restaurateurs, people in physical fitness, right? A lot of people are losing their standard income. How's that going to affect their housing stock moving forward? Landlords, are being told that there's a 90-day moratorium for no evictions. There's policies right now that have been floating about, pausing rent collection. That's going to have a direct effect on the landlord's ability to pay the mortgage. And will have a direct effect on the bank's performance. So I think there's kind of a domino effect of events that, we're all closely monitoring.
I'll address the AMI question just from a fact-based. So HUD has a rule in place where the AMI cannot drop lower than 5% from year to year. This is a thing that we are closely watching because, as you rightly pointed out, Jesse and Gerard, we underwrite these deals, to one cash flow level and subsidize them at one level. And if that drops tremendously between the time you close on your construction loan and the time you get your permanent loan in place, it creates a lot of stress for not only the government agencies, but also for the developers who are producing the housing. And then, obviously for the renters where there's demand. 95% of our portfolio is targeted at households below 80% AMI. So this is clearly a big issue to sort of, be mindful of as we go forward, and how we, like I was talking a little bit about the CARES Act, but how we make sure that there's forbearance policies that are in place for owners. I think this is probably, just from an academic perspective, not the time to sort of pit owners and renters against each other, right? I think everybody has to be at the table and the policies have to address you know, the fact that the renters need, you know, some sort of a voucher-like type program so that they can sort of subsidize their rent, and the owners need to be sort of addressing their operating expenses at their properties and paying their debt service. So I think everybody's, you know, trying to scramble to figure out what's that right, like, solution to that balanced issue. And I'm sure others have thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's hugely important about, you know, how this pandemic is affecting us right now and in the near future. Chris alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I was wondering if you guys could speak to this as well. You know, also part of this is more of a shift in mentality of our culture, and people not necessarily wanting to go denser and denser. That's been for the last, you know, 20 years. Everyone's been getting denser and denser, and now there's a bit of a feeling like, hey, maybe it's time to step back from that and move back outside of the city. Is that something that you guys are seeing and anticipating at all?
I think one, you know, if you want to try to find a silver lining, you know, New York has been hyperactive on the real estate space for at least the last 10 years on year over year. Rents are higher, land costs are higher. Maybe this will cool things off a little bit. There's a number of folks who leave New York City or left New York City because of this pandemic. You know, there's some that are considering not coming back. So maybe that'll allow, you know, related to the affordable housing space, maybe that will ease the pressure of, you know, the supply and demand problem where, you know, we've had a lot more people that want to live in New York City than there's been space available for them. So potentially that could ease up some in this new environment where everybody doesn't necessarily want to live in a smaller space or cramped space.
Yeah, and I'll just, I want to agree with you, Gerard. I do think there are people who have left the city because they're able to do their jobs from, you know, their hometown in Ohio, and they may not come back and they may not need to come back. And I think it's possible that there's going to be a huge shift in the way that people work and how people experience an urban environment. And I don't think we all know what it's going to be like in 2 years or 6 months or 10 years. But I agree that it is an opportunity to kind of hopefully find some balance in the demand and supply issue that has been here for a very long time. Of course, folks leaving the city, a drop in occupancy, a job loss will definitely have a negative impact on the city and state coffers, of course, because their tax revenue will drop, and that's a concern as well. So there are a lot of factors of people moving away and not coming back. What are people's incomes going to be if they do stay? Those are all big question marks right now. And I think everybody's trying to figure out like what's going to hit and what are really the sensitivities around those variables. It's a lot of variables.
Yeah, if I could just jump in as well, Jesse. You know, I'll try to strike a more hopeful note that, you know, I think part of the movement toward greater density and building and rebuilding our city and other cities, you know, it's a multi-year, multi-decade sort of trend that we've seen. And I think, you know, for very good reasons. We have, you know, we're currently dealing with this pandemic crisis, but we also have the looming climate crisis. And there are, you know, so many factors that have been pushing us toward denser development, more centralized development. You know, there are reasons why people want to move back to cities or move to cities. The work that people have done on affordable housing and community development and redevelopment in New York City in the last 3.5 decades are what has made the city so attractive and so many neighborhoods around the city so much more vibrant. And I think that trend will continue. And I think, people want to be together. I think those of us who are now experiencing remote working and this environment of living in Zoom boxes all day, are all craving the time when we can sit around a table and talk about our projects again and go visit our sites and, walk around our neighborhoods and meet with our neighbors. And I think there's a lot we have to think about the design and the density and the placemaking of our cities. But I'm hopeful that we'll continue these trends, and we just need to be thoughtful about public health issues more than maybe we have been in the past. Think about how we deal with something like this in the future and be better prepared for it.
Is there a chance at all that, if people are leaving outside of the city and, maybe coming back into the city to work, or maybe not all 5 days, if we start doing a little bit more remote office, does that decrease the need for office space? And is there an opportunity to convert any of that office space potentially to residential, or is that something we don't want to start theorizing about just quite yet?
Slightly adjacent. So part of the reason why New York is such an attractive city, because it has, one of the best employment centers in the country and possibly in the world. Incredibly high paying jobs, a finance center of the world, and the second best tech employment center in the country. Maybe we're going to have people come back to use less office space, which will probably have a direct effect on the residential housing stock. And those two big industries I just talked about, they don't necessarily have to be in New York City to do those jobs. So, and a lot of people are doing work from home. I can't lie. I like cooking every night now. So, and I kind of knew I could do work from home, but I'm doing 95% of my work other than going to see job sites, other than physical meetings, which I'll still do. But, we can be pretty productive and do business slightly differently. I've heard about corporations that are starting to recalibrate. I think I heard that RXR is actually setting up different office satellites that people don't have to necessarily come to Midtown Manhattan to work, that they actually have smaller office points outside of the city core. So that could potentially have an effect on the real estate, on the residential side.
I agree. I think it's going to present a lot of opportunities, and I feel like it's one of those things where the retail and office sector right now are going through a lot of changes, and this is certainly going to have a huge impact on that. I don't think, even though the changes were happening long before the COVID crisis, I think this is going to kind of cause another jolt, another wild card to put into the mix of what was already kind of happening.
Do we see, I think a lot of people on this call, in the architecture, so in the planning or the construction industry, how long do we think this downturn could be in terms of ramping back up to construction? Is there too much uncertainty even when people start going back and everything gets started opening up? Do we see fears that there'll be a bit of a lag before we start designing more buildings and the developers start pulling the trigger on new work?
I'll offer something. Initially, I think for affordable housing specifically, which
Yes.
is considered in a service, the production of affordable housing, I do think that projects are going to continue to move, and just some what I've heard about what's happening in the construction, where there deals that are in construction now, affordable housing projects that are in construction now, like my own, I'm very early in the process. The building's not closed up, and we're not relying on flooring materials or paint. People aren't working in enclosed rooms. So our contractor has really been able to keep the project moving. We're still setting plank, and the mason is still showing up. The crews are reduced, and they're having to work in separate areas from other trades, but we're still moving along, and that's very positive. I do know that there are projects, or I've heard of other projects that are further along in the construction process that are having delays because of supply chain issues. And I do think those things are going to start to work themselves out as the governor is starting to discuss having manufacturing start up again. These are all things that are going to help with continue the affordable housing development. On the other side of that, when we have such a huge negative impact to our state and local governments and their ability to continue to fund affordable housing, that's kind of a concern about how is our pipeline going to stay. It's been incredibly robust. Developers are wanting to build things, that bringing deals to the table, and the availability of these incentives and different resources that the cities and states have is going to be reduced to a certain extent. And so I think there's going to be an imbalance there too. And so it's a push and pull. We're not, a market rate condo completely shut down, and that's going to have a whole startup process that's different. Affordable housing projects are still moving. There's still some progress and work being done. It's kind of hard to know exactly, but these are the things that are part of the equation.
Yeah, and I would say, since this is an architect sort of crew, to echo the sort of supply chain, the most interesting thing about COVID has been that every state has a different response to it. So while New York State's response is that, affordable housing construction is essential, to Desiree's point, most of the projects have continued, but it's interesting to see how, some projects have slowed because they can't get cabinets from Pennsylvania because that state shut down, the cabinet makers or whatever. So this has been sort of I think we should all think that maybe this comes back and we should get lessons learned from this go around if this does come back in the fall. But for the most part, I think that's right on pipeline that, I think it's New York State has like a 3-year-ish demand in pipeline. New York City says that they have like an 8-year demand in pipeline. So I think on the affordable side, we have the pipeline there. It's going to be about matching the funding, and then the projects that are in construction, I think maybe 60 to 90-day lag for some people to sort of address the pipeline, the supply chain, but it should be able to kind of, continue. I think folks should still be working on new projects and things like that. I think it just depends on when those things close.
Is there any specific source of affordable housing that might be more in need than others in terms of homelessness or very low income or elderly? There's quite a number of different groups that, Chris was targeting specifically LGBTQ youth. Are there these specific groups that might get targeted more thoroughly in the future?
I'll jump on the federal, what's happening at the federal level is that a lot of the federally funded sort of relief programs are looking at the 30% AMI households. So that is, but I think, there's a big conversation around, in upstate New York, 60% AMI, which is low income, is market rate in some areas, right? And so that is working class AMIs for a lot of the country. New York City, San Francisco, Boston is different, right? Urban centers, but yeah, I think right now a lot of people are focused at the 30s, but I don't know others what your sort of.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So, I think, Jesse, what this whole crisis has sort of highlighted for people, and certainly those of us in the affordable housing field, have been grappling with this for years. But I think it has raised for the country, this issue of specifically homelessness and the need for more housing that specifically serves the very lowest income folks in our communities, whether that's specifically supportive housing for folks who have specific needs or for specific populations, or just generally housing that is deeply affordable. The images that we're seeing of people sleeping on the subway, hearing of people who are getting sick because they don't have a safe place, a safe room, individual room of their own to sleep, and so they're unfortunately, stuck in congregate shelters. I think, we're seeing it in New York, we're seeing it around the country in all the cities that have had challenges around homelessness for many, many years, that there is this new kind of focus on it. And hopefully coming from that will be some new resources and some additional focus on how we get people safely housed in appropriate housing. And whether that's like some new typologies like the ones I was talking about earlier, design innovations, experimenting with more cost-effective construction technologies like modular housing, timber housing, some of the things that people have been piloting and talking about. Hopefully this will provide that push. And to the point about what's going to happen with affordable housing and what about the pipeline, hopefully, in some of the future funding, because it's likely that there will be more federal funding that comes to try to address this crisis and rehabilitate our economy. Hopefully some of it will be targeted specifically to affordable housing creation, so that these pipelines of projects that are ready but for financing will move forward. So, as we're thinking about it in our organization, I keep talking to my team about making sure that our projects are shovel ready, so that whether it's in 6 months or a year, whether it's when the economy improves or there's more government stimulus funding, that we have our projects ready to go, that we're working through whatever the public approvals process looks like, that we're continuing to work with our design teams around finalizing plans, that we're reaching out to our community to make sure that we have support for the projects that we're working on. But it's definitely going to be a huge challenge for all of us.
And I wanted to
I'd
add,
say.
oh,
Go ahead, Derza. You first.
no, you go first.
Okay. I'd like to add, you asked about, affordable housing moving forward. One of the major portions of de Blasio's housing plan was to have additional tranches of affordability. So the mayor before, there was created a massive amount of affordable housing, largely below 60% of AMI. De Blasio also, made a push for having, housing for teachers, cops, and firemen as well, right? People who are in additional tranches. So that has been encouraged, what I think is actually a positive thing. There's also at the same time been a big push for supportive housing, which is, as Chris and Nicole were just mentioning, there's been a big effort to catching folks that are at, 30% and below of AMI. But I think what's great to making vibrant communities is having those folks also live, with different tranches of economic statuses and backgrounds, right? Having artists and lawyers and teachers and cops, right? And social workers all living in the same communities, I think has been a push from the city subsidy size, which I think is actually a positive thing, which I think creates, part of what makes New York special, right? You walk down the sidewalk, you have a millionaire next to an artist, next to a bartender, right? We're all in this place together, which is part of what makes New York City exciting. I think moving forward, I think affordable housing is going to be the foundation of that. on creating more housing for folks who need it, as well as, for those who can afford market rate housing, they will have their housing stock out there as well.
And I wanted to add, just for context, we are so incredibly fortunate in New York City and New York State to have housing agencies at the state and local level that are so experienced, sophisticated, and creative in coming up with solutions for the housing problems that present themselves over time. And that is not the case in every state or municipality. We really, really have a very strong partner team on the public side, and we're very lucky to have that. In just kind of speaking to coming to solutions, coming out of this, how are we going to address these things? Incredibly smart, dedicated people, deep toolbox for coming up with ways to address these things. Thank you, Nicole.
Well,
Great.
both you and Chris worked at those agencies as well, so
All
I think
right,
that's
guys,
right. Yeah.
I'm going to have to stop our panelists for a second and open this up to questions from the audience. And Vicki, if you could send out the poll now, if everyone who's online can please enter your answers to these polling questions. This will help us direct our future executive education platform for you. And in the meantime, anyone who has been sitting on questions, type them into the chat window and we will do our best to answer them. I think I let our guys go a little bit long here, but we'll see how many we can get through as well. So I'm going to start while everyone's filling out their polls. We had a question by Rurik here that says, if affordable housing can be considered infrastructure, is there reason to believe that new federal money or low interest money could become available, resulting in jobs and housing? I think that's a lot of what we were just talking about, quite honestly. But if there's anything else to add to that.
I don't know if I'd call it infrastructure, but yeah, I mean, essential construction. Affordable housing has, been in high regard in most states. It's something that's important and it's something that should continue. I think infrastructure projects kind of adjacent to us, there's going to be a massive amount of federal investment in that in the near future. So that should be new jobs and employment created.
Okay. We have another question here from Andrew Hayner, who says, is there the potential for future zoning changes to allow for rooms that may not be habitable size, to allow for, this is for office rooms, to allow for work from home in future projects, especially as we get more and more working from home? Is there a possibility to kind of merge these two things into our zoning?
I'll jump on that and just say, hopefully. We have, as probably all the architects and planners and others who are on the call know, a pretty archaic zoning resolution that dates back over 50 years. Is not as flexible as I think most of us would like it to be, and certainly have also very strict requirements from the Department of Buildings and our building code. So there are, definitely things that we'd love to do that are more innovative in terms of the design of the units that we are planning. Hopefully the shared housing project that we're working on will lead to some changes. And I think this current situation does, raise the question about if working from home is a bigger part of people's future, how do we accommodate that? It's really we face a challenge in affordable housing of trying to develop as many units as we can in the amount of floor area that we have. And there are minimum sizes, and our, agency partners often don't want us to, take up more space than we need to create those units. So I think there are conversations to be had with all the relevant agencies, from city planning to HPD, HCR, and DOB, about what would it look like if we had more space in our units that gave them a bit more flexibility for how people might use that space, for instance, for work from home situations.
Right. We have a question from Jill asking us if anyone on the panel has experience with the $1 purchase of city-owned vacant buildings.
Yes. We participated in this program called the NIHOP program, the Neighborhood Improvement Housing Ownership Opportunity Program. So it's scattered sites. We were awarded about 17 sites in Brooklyn. We acquired them for $1. We are receiving subsidy from HPD, and we are going to create home ownership. So we're pretty excited about that. So they're going to be 3-story homes where people will own the building. They'll live in the first floor and they can rent out the upper 2 floors. So they'll become a small landlord and own a home in these communities. So our lots are located in East New York and Brownsville, but there's lots all over Brooklyn that people are awarded. And yes, we were awarded those for $1. And as Desiree was saying earlier, part of what makes these deals financeable and feasible is getting subsidy, getting tax abatement, and or getting land for free, and sometimes a combination of those three.
Right. We still have a little bit more time here. Go through a few more here. Bridget is asking us if there's going to be changes to our architectural design based on social distancing and our response to the pandemic. Are we going to have to change lobby space and other communal spaces? Are we going to use any new things like thermal imaging? It's a bit of a stretch from, where we're at with affordable housing, but I think, these are thoughts that we all have. You guys have all been talking to your design teams. I know, my clients have been asking me similar questions. So is that something that we're starting to push into the requirements for these affordable housing projects?
I would say it may be early for that, making those kinds of changes. I think we're still in the this state of trying to figure out exactly how things are going to work, and making those kinds of changes has an extremely long lead time, and it's difficult to change. So even though, I have a building that's under construction, and presumably it would be, we're early enough in the process that we might be able to make those changes. It's not really that easy. And you guys as architects probably know that already. So those are things that will probably reveal themselves over time as we see how long this lasts, how deep the change is to our culture and the needs of our communities. But it is something I think that people are starting to think about. I don't think we have an answer yet.
Right.
I would hope that, so I live in an apartment building, so I deal with some of this every day when I try to leave my home. I would think that we're going to make buildings have a little less hand necessity for getting in and out of buildings. So maybe more hands-free, press a button, door opens, or you don't have to twist the knob to open the door, that you can press to open the door. I actually go through that when I leave my apartment building. When I come back, that I have to twist the knob with my hand. That there may be some thoughtful, ideas put into design. I know at my personal home, I'm starting to do a lot more things hand-free. So maybe more smart homes technology will be incorporated. So hopefully architects can figure out how to implement smart home solutions in affordable housing buildings as well, including things like, smart lighting in buildings, hallways, stairways, things that are reduce energy costs. Hopefully that will be encouraged more as we kind of move forward.
Fantastic. We do have a couple more questions, but we have reached our limit. So I think at this point, I am just going to thank all of our speakers so much. Again, thank Pratt Institute and Brooklyn AIA for helping support us here. One final reminder to people online, if you need AIA credit for this seminar, please make sure you've typed your name into the chat so that we can get you your certificate on that. And with that, I think we will end for the day, and thank you again so much to our speakers.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now we have to figure out how to actually leave in a virtual setting.
One 100 people voted.
Yes, we had a very good response rate from our audience.
I don't know how you get these. I guess you're gonna screenshot them, Vicky. I don't know if it like.
It saves, I
Stays with
believe
you.
it saves the results. That's what I'm trying to figure out right now.
It's great. Eric's gonna have that.
I'm also copying the chat so that everybody gets their certificate.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you all so much. This was terrific.
Yeah, great.
And if you guys want to just end,
Oh wow!
leave the meeting.
Number
feel-
3. Would you be interested in taking another one of our courses? 100% said yes.
Yes, that's very gratifying.
Right, everyone, I'm sure we'll be following up again. I'll rehash of this in the coming days.
Exactly.
So I will talk to everyone later. I'm going to go join my family for dinner now.
Go right ahead. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye,
Jesse.
guys.
This was
Awesome.
great. Thank you
Thanks,
to our
everybody.
speakers. So great. You guys did a great job.
Thanks, Vicky.
Awesome. Thanks, Vicky.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye-bye.